All right, everyone, welcome back to another enlightening episode of the All Me podcast. And today's episode is sponsored by NSF Certified for Sport, the gold standard in third-party certification of dietary supplements. So for those of you who grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, you were glued to the TV when American Gladiators was on. And I was one of those kids who loved the American Gladiator. So it's not every day that you get to do a podcast with one of your childhood heroes. And today we have Jim Laser Starr joining us on the All Me podcast. So Jim, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I appreciate it. Yeah, this is going to be exciting. So, obviously NSF and so forth and American Gladiators, there's a lot of things that we can cover, but I just appreciate you. You and I have become pretty close in the last year or so, especially with what you're doing at the Taylor Hooton Foundation and what we do at NSF. And it's just a great partnership.
I agree. And I always tell people like, well, how did you meet him? Because, obviously my age, like everybody knows who the American Gladiators were. And I guess when Netflix had released the documentary on the American Gladiators, I had watched it over the how many episodes it was during my travels. And I remember during the meetings when we were in New York at Major League Baseball headquarters, you had walked in with John Travis and he'd introduced you. And I remember looking at you like, I know you from somewhere. You're like, yeah, no, I don't think you know me. I'm like, no, I know you from somewhere. And when you had mentioned, who you were Laser on American Gladiators, like, bingo, like I had put two and two together. So it was neat how we met.
Yeah, it was pretty cool there at I think it was the Performance Enhancing Supplement Symposium there in New York, and a couple of days of that, and just some really, really fabulous speakers there.
Yeah.
And then obviously meeting you for the first time. And we've had just a really close relationship since then. And we're doing lots of things on the background with the Taylor Hooton Foundation and NSF, and looking forward to the future.
Yeah, no, me too. So what I want to kind of do is just kind of talk about your early life. I mean, you've been an athlete your whole life, and now, you're representing NSF Certified for Sport in a very important role, especially as it relates to young people. We have a lot of young people and athletic trainers and sports dietitians that tune into our podcast. So I think all of this will be very relative to them, and especially for some of us folks that are in our 40s and 50s, grew up watching you and having all the lunch boxes and all that fun stuff. So let's kind of talk about your early years, about, where you grew up, and were you always an athlete? Did you love sports? Like, let's kind of, I guess, kick off the conversation there.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Great Falls, Montana. Montana, truly, to me, I'm living in Denver now, my wife and I, but I've always considered Montana my home. Very proud to be a Montanan, and I grew up there, went to college at Montana State University with the Bobcats, had quite a few scholarship opportunities outside of Montana, but wanted to stay in Montana. I had a great recruiting trip to Montana State, and they won me over. But speaking of being an athlete, my dad was a NCAA boxing champion. He was heavyweight champion at Washington State. Tough guy. He also had a full ride scholarship, played tight end at Washington. So, and then my grandpa, he had the biggest size mitts I've ever seen. And people talk about it today. This is no joke. He had the biggest paws, and he was a carpenter. And back in the day, swinging the 16-ounce hammer all day long. But he was a national handball champion. It's pretty hard for him not to miss a ball when his paws were out to here. But yeah, he was something else. And, and the thing about it is, I remember growing up, my dad nor my mom ever pushed me or my brother into sports. It just kind of morphed into, hey, we were just athletes. We played every sport you could imagine, my brother and I wrestled, boxed. I boxed in high school and college.
Oh, wow.
I did these smokers, the 3 1-minute rounds, and you beat each other up to death. But yeah, just growing up, I probably did every sport you could imagine, but football was everything to me. It truly was a passion of mine. And speaking of football, I think the first time I realized maybe I was a little kind of on the crazy side is we would always play flag football down at this park called JC Park, pretty close to our home. And I was in probably fourth grade. We were out there playing flag football, and I went up to catch a pass, and this other kid hit me, and my lip went through my teeth, and I was bleeding everywhere. I kept playing. And I went home and my mom, I came in the door and I was just bleeding. And you got to realize I was fourth grade. And she says, Jim, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? You're bleeding everywhere. We got to get you to the hospital. I said, nah, I'm all right. And we never went. And it was really the first time I realized that this, football may be my type of sport. And it just didn't bother me, bleeding. And, my lip was still stuck in my tooth when I went home. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it all started then. Yeah.
Okay, so, and you were pretty good. In fact, you were an All-American at Montana State, right?
Yeah. Here's what happened in high school. I was the leading, I was a tailback. I graduated at 200 pounds. I was always into weightlifting. I still have the bench press record at our high school, which is Charles M. Russell, CMR in Great Falls. I benched 400 pounds when I was a senior in high school, and I graduated at 200. I was recruited as a fullback, and I started at Montana State. I myself and another, let's see, he was a senior running back. He was a fullback. Him and I we went, he would go in, a couple plays and I'd come in another couple plays, but we traded back and forth. And then and then I started my sophomore year, but then we brought in a new coach by the name of Doug Graber. Let me tell you what a guy he is. He turned my life around in terms of what it meant to be physically and mentally tough. He came in the beginning of my junior year and we had winter conditioning that we never had before. And he had us getting up at 4:30 in the morning, getting into the field house at 5. We would have these 2-hour workouts that would kick your fanny. And I'm telling you, it was the hardest workout I've ever done. And he changed the mindset at Montana State from that point on. He hired the first paid strength and conditioning coach, Rock Gullickson, who then went to the NFL. But during that winter conditioning program at the end, Coach Graber came to me and says, listen, Jim, your mentality, man, you are not an offensive player. I know you want to go pro. You don't have the wheels. I didn't. I was running a 4.65, 4.62. And he said, let's try you at linebacker. What do you think? He says, you're mentally just tough. And I said, yeah, let's give it a try. So my spring season going into my junior year, I excelled at linebacker. Let me tell you, it was just a fit that came out of nowhere. I excelled. And then I broke all kinds of records at Montana State in the Big Sky. I had 202 tackles my junior year, 32 tackles in a game. Both of those are records today. My senior year, I ended up missing 4 games due to an ankle injury. I could have gray shirted, but I went in on the 4th quarter of the 4th game that I missed. If I didn't, I could have gray shirted. And everybody kept telling me, why don't you just gray shirt and get another year of eligibility? But as an athlete, you don't care about next year. You want to play now, right? You want to play in our team. This is great. This is a crazy story. So we went 1-10 my junior year. Doug Graber happens to move on. He goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. Same coaching staff, same players. All my buddies were juniors. We all lived together. The next year, they won the national championship. That is and I was so close. I'm just thinking, that is the one regret I wish I could take back, but who knows where I would have landed, right? But
You never know.
you just never know. But yeah, I was, and then my senior year, I ended up with 177 tackles, and I missed those 4 games, and I would have blew the 202 tackles, out of the water. And I think I'm one of the all-time leading tacklers at Montana State. I think I'm 4th listed. But it was sort of before they started taking truly NCAA records, even though they took film records and they looked at how many tackles you had. I don't think they started really the sophistication of taking the record book down until I think 1992. So it's kind of unofficial records, but it is what it is.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So were you being looked at by NFL teams?
I was. Unfortunately, it is. It does matter how well you do. I'm coming from a smaller college, Montana State. We didn't do well. And I had an agent by the name of Ken Stanager out of Montana, and we were pretty certain I was going to get drafted, but that injury hurt me. What else hurt me? I was only 5'11 and a half. And linebackers, the stereotypical linebacker back in those days were 6'2" to 6'4".
Oh,
So I
geez.
didn't fit that mold, right? But my 40 time was a 4.5. I mean, I was 230 pounds. My mile, everything I did. I mean, you mentioned 225 for reps of 18 and things that you got to get tested out on. My vertical was great. What hurt me was my height, and they truly looked at that. But one thing I did, Don, and I always made myself a promise, always. And I started this when I was in high school, that if anyone was to ever beat me out, it wasn't because they trained harder. It was
Mm.
just because they were a better athlete. And I made sure going into the NFL draft and after my senior year that the same mental fortitude came about, that I did anything and everything to be in the best shape, the best athlete, because I didn't want any regrets down the road. And I can seriously look back at my life and say I did what it took to make and be that player on that team. Because when I went to Kansas City, I tested out better than every linebacker was there. Unfortunately, it's all about numbers. I didn't get drafted. I thought I was going to get drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs because remember, Doug Graber went to the Chiefs. He put a good word in for me, and I went right to the end. I went right to the fourth preseason game, and I hurt my ankle. And I just talked to Coach Graber. He said I most likely would have made the team, on their roster, but I hurt my ankle, and they sent me home and cut me. And I was just devastated. It was just a tough deal, really a tough deal.
It's hard to, you never know. It's like the last game you play wiffle ball in the yard, right? Or the
Yeah,
last hanging out with your friends, at the playground, or, the last time you get to run a football. And that's always hard, like, especially for a lot of athletes. How do I transition from what I'm doing? You've done that really your whole career, transition to different careers. And this one's kind of interesting because you transfer really out of this whole football realm into this super exciting, polarizing new game that they've got on TV,
yeah,
the American Gladiators. So, can you kind of talk about life after football and how you became
yeah.
this famous TV star? And what I'll say, and again, this is my opinion, I think a lot of people agree with this, one of the greatest shows ever on TV. Even my wife was saying when I told her about the interview, she's like, I always look forward to the weekends because you could stay up all night watching the American Gladiators.
Right.
Never forget.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let me fill you in just a little bit. So after the Chiefs, they cut me because I hurt my ankle. I went back home, trained
Okay.
for a little longer. I went back. I had 2 quarters left at Montana State. Went back, did another quarter of school. Then I went up to Canada with Toronto Argonauts, and I played up there.
Okay.
So
So
I
you played.
went up. Yeah, I played for the Argos for a year. Kind of a goofy league because if they can only have so many injured Americans on the injury reserve at one time, and if they get filled with too many injured reserve, then they shuffle you between teams back and forth. And they shuffled me home. Then they brought me back. And I just thought, that's not my idea of professional football. So I went back home, went back to school, and I finished up my degree, which thankfully I did. I got into bodybuilding. I did the Mr. Montana. I think I took second. I can't remember what I did, but I really got into bodybuilding because I had nothing. I was very driven to be, my dream was to play professional football. That's all I cared about.
Yeah.
Bodybuilding was just a way to fill the void. It wasn't my forte and something I loved to do, but it's something I did. And then after I came back from Toronto, went to Montana State and graduated, I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? So when the strike season came about in the NFL, I was already living in California. I was working at a health club that I moved to California by myself. I was working at a health club. My agent called and said, listen, hey, the Rams are looking for a linebacker. I said, well, I just got this new corporate job. After that, I'm done with the corporate world. I'm going to
Yeah.
play football. I packed up my bags and the company was like, we just hired you.
Uh,
So sorry, I'm going to play football. I went down to Kansas City, or the Rams that were in Anaheim, and I met Dan Clark Nitro. We
yeah.
became roommates, and I made the team, but we're playing in the Superdome against the Saints, and a guy just happened to, I'm running down on a kickoff, and a guy just happens to hit my arm just perfectly. And it was like a car crash is what they tried to explain to me. And I crushed my larynx. I lost my voice. I punctured a lung. I had an impaction fracture on my scapula, and that's what punctured the lung. The crazy thing is I played the whole game with that because I was so scared to come out. I took my shoulder pads off and I almost passed out because of what it looked like. It was, and I did lose my voice for 5 months. They didn't know if the voice was going to come back, but that was the end of my playing days. Let me tell you, Don, as an athlete, that was 1987. It was a very, very difficult time to transition into the real world, knowing that you'll never play football again, something that you love to do. That what do you fill your void with? Like I'm very regimented. I know exactly what to do, how to do it, what to eat, and all that was taken away from me. And you talk about depression and some sad times. And when you hear about athletes that end up getting hurt and they lose what they love to do, that transitional period is very, very difficult. And so fortunately for myself and Dan Clark, Nitro, we started doing some commercial work in Hollywood. And Dan and I were living off the money that I received from my injury. I was paying the rent and doing all the other crazy stuff. And we were still having a good time, but I was still going through that transitional depressed period in my life for 3 years. And we were living down in Orange County in California. And then one thing led to another. We moved up to LA and Dan and I had the same agent. And the agent said, "Hey, there's this new show called American Gladiators. You guys want to try out? It's right up your alleyway." I tried out and made the show. And I was the longest tenured gladiator, 7.5, 8 years that lasted, and along with many, many injuries and surgeries.
Well, no, that's really cool. So, but I want to kind of go back to something you said. You said you and Dan were doing commercials, and it was interesting, very, very early on. And I'm trying to remember what show it was, but my father was asked to do, it was a TV show. I know it wasn't Montel, although he did that show, but part of the cast or the guests, I guess, that were there that day was Dan Nitro Clark. So I got to meet him early on. I know he wrote a book, and I actually got in our room and all that stuff. But how do you guys end up doing commercials? Is this because you're former athletes, you're good looking guys? Like, how do you end up just getting, like, what kind of commercials are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I did. Well, so the way it works in Hollywood, you have an agent. The agent submits your picture, your Z card, to an open casting call. And then if they think you fit the role of what they're looking for, you go out on audition. And there's usually always 2 to 3 auditions. So you go back, usually you see the same old guys at the auditions, bodybuilders, athletes. And we just started doing extra work. And I started doing really well in terms of doing national commercials. I did a Coors Light commercial. I was in 5 different spots. I was on Bud Light. I mean, you talk about a really cool couple years there where I was doing quite well. And it just morphed into, the American Gladiators thing. And that was it, really.
So, okay, I didn't know that little piece, which is very interesting. So how do you try out for American Gladiators? I mean, again, if you would know this if you watched the whole documentary, right? I know you guys into it, and there was actually some footage from it and all that. But I mean, talk about what this, like, is it just average people in LA? Like, hey, I obviously can't take the average guy. You got to be an athlete. You probably got to have some sort of size on you. Maybe not contestants, but kind of talk about what are you doing? Like, what do they have you do to get selected to ultimately be an American Gladiator?
Yeah, for sure. I'll take you back to my first tryout. So Dan and I get this tryout. We go to we went, I think it was USC. We went to the football, the stadium there, their practice field. And and I'm going to back up here. So when I tried out for the Gladiators, my first time, I was trying to get into modeling because my agent says, "You're too big. You're 230 pounds. I was 4.5% body fat." He goes, "You're just too big. I think we can get you more work if you cut down some of your weight and get down to about 205, 210. I said, "All right." So what I did, I went back to Montana in an entire summer of 1989, and I trained and I did cardio. You got to remember, I was only 4.5%, 5% body fat at 230. So there wasn't much fat to lose. It was all muscle. Unfortunately, I went from 230 and I got down to 205. So when I went back to LA, tried out for the Gladiators, and I was 205 pounds and I tried out. I was going up against guys that were 260, 280, 290, and I was kicking the you-know-what out of them. Yeah. And I think that mentality that I have, that linebacker never surrender attitude, that really got the directors and the producers' attention. That, hey, this guy's 205 pounds. They knew my background playing in the NFL and the CFL, but I think that really put I guess the stake in the ground in terms of me solidifying my role as Laser on the Gladiators, and they selected me, and the rest was history. And that was it. It was just phenomenal. I lasted I think it was 8 seasons, 7 years. No one did that. I think Nitro lasted 4 years, I think, on and off. But yeah, it was pretty impressive to go that long with that many injuries.
Yeah. So now, when you're competing, so I guess real quick too, I gotta know. So do they select Laser for you? Is that just your given name, or is like, do you have any sort of say so in your name?
Most of the Gladiators were given their name. I still remember we were at Universal Studios the first year, and nobody could come up with a name. The producers and directors, and we were sitting up in the bleachers having lunch. And I remember this gal, Julie Rush, who was the producer, said, "Jim, what do you think? Wait, I mean, when you think of yourself as an athlete, a human being, you're gonna and picture yourself being on this TV show with sports, and
Yeah.
how would you describe yourself?" And I took a second and I thought, a laser beam, like it'll cut right through you, like nothing's faster and tougher than a laser.
Yeah.
So I said, "How about laser?" "Oh my gosh, that's it. That's it. You're laser." And that was it. So that's how
So, you talk about your injuries, and I mean, I don't even know if they could put American Gladiators on today. I mean, there was full contact. I mean, the liability and stuff, people just today would just go bananas, right? I mean, the
crazy.
lawsuits and all sorts of stuff, which I think made the show so cool and unique because it was a lot of fun games. I remember even being in like my friends' basements, we were trying to recreate some of this stuff,
Right.
right? Especially like joust. So, I mean, obviously you're getting hurt, but you're competing a whole heck of a lot more, filming every day than the contestants that are coming in. Were there ever any, serious injuries that would happen to a contestant? Was it time? Was it, can you kind of talk about that?
Great question. So in my 8 years, man, I've never seen so many injuries. The one thing that the American Gladiators team, the producers, directors, did not want to do, because they wanted it to be a family-oriented show. They didn't want to show really the background of what was really happening in terms of injuries. I can tell you there was one injury that I still remember today that still gives me goosebumps. At the end, you had the contestants doing that eliminator, and they ran up that conveyor belt right at the beginning, and then they had to run across that log that was rolling around, then the apparatus going up the ropes, and right in the beginning. So this guy goes up he's running up that chute, and his fingers got caught in the conveyor belt. He completely severed these 3 fingers. Nobody knew it. He went through the whole, it's just shock. He went through the whole obstacle course. I'm at the end of the obstacle course, and we were holding those little bags while they're running through the curtain or whatever it was.
You don't know which one where you guys are.
Yeah, the caves well.
Oh, yeah.
So all of a sudden, blood is just shooting. I mean, I'd never seen any. I mean, it was like a water cannon. Like the blood was just. We're like, oh my gosh! And he went to the hospital. They were fortunately able to attach 2 of the fingers back on, but that was probably one of the most gruesome injuries. There was another injury that Turbo, Galen Tomlinson, one of the Gladiators, had, where he tore his knee. It was like that Joe Theismann injury. Remember that one?
Yeah.
It was just like that. He came back the next year, that guy was one tough son of a gun, but Galen Turbo, that was a gruesome injury. And that was probably the only time in 8 years that I remember that they actually showed the injury on TV. How they usually show them on the NFL now, and they, and sometimes they're so bad they don't show them. They did show that one for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, but boy, I got to tell you, there were so many injuries on that show. It was just, what a liability.
Yeah, and you had the older style turf, then especially the one game where you had to take the ball and get it in the bucket, and you guys
the atmosphere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you talk about knees and all that sort of stuff. So obviously, health and training is super important. So regardless, I mean, you're on a game show, just like I think people you see the NFL or you see Major League Baseball and they see the show, right? So ultimately the competition that's going on, it's super glamorous. You've got fans there, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. So none of the events, from what I understand, what I saw in the documentary, they were staged or choreographed. So you've got to stay in top physical condition. Again, you're competing every day. These contestants aren't. So what was like your training routine like? Did you have a nutrition program you're on? Kind of talk about what you did to keep yourself healthy while you were competing.
Yeah, for sure. So my entire life, and even today, I'm 62 years old, and I've been going to the gym since I was 14 years old. The only time I've ever missed is either a vacation or an injury, healing up from surgery. And nutrition is key, right? And obviously, I do a lot of dietary supplements, but I've always wanted this physique that we visualize in our mind, but we're never there, right? And we're always chasing that dream of what we want to look like. And I think that's what kept me going in terms of wanting to look the best, be the best. And even during the Gladiators, it was important to me to look, to feel good, to look good, to be a specimen, basically. And the unfortunate thing about this, Don, is, bodybuilders, and nothing against bodybuilders, right? So they're probably the most unhealthiest people in the world because, going to severe dieting and you're down to 3, 4, 5%, it wreaks havoc on your body. You go through a living, I'd say a living hell when you're dieting, and it's very unhealthy. And even, today I'm 62, I still watch my diet, but it's back in the day during the Gladiators, man. It's just, the training regimen was all I knew how to do was train hard and just be the best. And I did aerobics, I did boxing, I did aerobic, swimming, I do cardio, I do it with a heavy vest. I did split workout routines with going to the gym once in the morning, once at night. And my whole day was 8 to 9 hours of training.
Did they provide you guys, like, did you have a weight room, or did you guys, I guess sports dietitians didn't exist back then, but did they provide you guys with food? Did they provide you guys and gals with, like, the weight equipment, or were you kind of on your own? Like you had to go off to, LA Fitness or Gold's Gym or something to work out?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. The TV show only lasted about 3 weeks. So they did 28 to 31 episodes within that 3-week period. And it always happened during the summer. So we had all year to train or heal up from surgery, because I had surgery every year on the Gladiators, all shoulder surgeries. But during the 29, 28 shows we would do in that 3-week period, they would have a weight room. We always had some good on-site trainers, the wrapping ankles and taking care of injuries. So they did take care of us that way. And they had some really good nutritional food plan for us, always, fruits and vegetables and anything that we wanted. So, they did take care of us on that end. They sure did.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that, because that's talked about the show, and I knew you and I had talked about that too. That is a lot of filming. That's like almost like playing an NFL game.
Yeah, it was
every day, 3 weeks.
Every day. And the thing is, if you competed today, let's say today's a Monday and you competed for the first time and you're going up against the Gladiators, you would compete on a Monday. And if you advanced, you probably wouldn't compete again until probably Thursday or Friday of that same week. So you had all those days to rest. We're doing 2 shows back to back, 12-hour days. And I can tell you, if you were injured, that's it. You got paid for only the shows you were on. You didn't have a 1-year contract. They paid you for all 29 episodes. And where you received most of your residual payment was because of the reruns. So you missing one show, one episode, that's big dollars, right? And so most of us, that's all we relied on was American Gladiator income for that year, and doing some other things in the off season. But yeah, it was really important that we didn't get hurt and injured and miss any episodes.
Yeah, it's really hard to wrap your mind around that. Again, we don't want to spoil the Netflix series, but if you haven't seen it, and you were, growing up during this time or even afterwards, and you really fell in love with the show, it was very, very well done.
It was done good. Yeah,
it was very, very well produced. And it kind of gives you a perspective of, you were in the spotlight, but it was hard. It was a hard spotlight to be in, especially you said, I mean, if I'm injured, okay, well, I'm going to keep competing because this is the way I've got to make money for the rest of the year.
That's right. And, and back in the day, Don, I mean, unfortunately, you look back in life and think, and you shake your head going, really, I did that?
Yeah.
There was, when you're injured and you work all year for something, your dream, a job, and you're injured, you're going to do whatever it takes to get back on that playing field. And the amount of, the Percocet and the pain pills and the things that all of us did just to stay afloat so we could make up and be on that TV show. It's alarming to me. I mean, today it frightens me to think what I did back then. Like, not
Yeah.
only me, the rest of the gladiators, just to be well enough to go out and compete. And it's really unfortunate that what we went through. It really is.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the perspective that the documentary gives you. Sort of, I mean, you see the spotlight, right? You see the actual event. You don't see the injuries or
No.
going on in the background while it's taking place. And a lot of people are big fans of these Netflix documentaries. Can you kind of talk about what it was like filming? I mean, it looks like you guys are sitting in an industrial house somewhere, but
Pretty cool.
how long does it take them? I mean, how do you have to make multiple trips for filming? Do they film it all in one day? Like, how do they put everything together? And I guess the only other question, sort of in the back of my mind, I'm taking notes here as well. But like, when they're do you get to weigh in on anything, or are there things that you're not able to share? On can you like kind of give us sort of, I guess, open the curtains a little bit to what it was like making a Netflix series like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kind of do a culmination of how it all came about. We were approached by ESPN because ESPN came out with an American Gladiator documentary. There was only 2 episodes. Johnny Ferraro, the creator of the show, called each of us individually and said, "Hey, ESPN, they want to do a documentary on American Gladiators, but just so you know, it's going to be all about me. And if you want to join the documentary, great." We're like, "Johnny, this is not about you. This is about American Gladiators." And he ended up making that call to quite a few of the gladiators. And we all got together as a team and just said, you know what? We were taken advantage of back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. It's not going to happen. They didn't want to pay us to be on this documentary. And most of us reneged on going to the ESPN route. So now all of a sudden, Netflix gets interested based on Dan Clark because he's in Hollywood. He's in that industry still. He became one of the executive producers on Netflix. They hired Dan to kind of put it together. And fortunately, Netflix came around and they offered us a nominal fee. It wasn't much, but it was a lot better than nothing. And so we felt that we weren't victims any longer, that we ended up winning that battle. And so when we got on that Netflix documentary, they flew us out to LA. We were in an abandoned warehouse, to your point, right downtown LA. It was really cool. And it only took a day of filming. I was there probably most of the day, but they already had questions ready for us to answer, right? So everybody had certain questions. And the unfortunate thing, you take 6-7 hours of film and they edit it and you're only on for 3 minutes maybe, right? So there was a lot of cool things that I thought were significant that they could have there's only so much time, right? There's 5 episodes, but there's only so much time in an episode. So there was a lot of things that I stated in the interview that I thought would have been really cool for the show. But there were some things that they did put on that I didn't think one way or another. I talked about my dad. That was pretty emotional, and losing a father and things like that. And I had people from all over the world, which was really touching to me. I'm an emotional guy anyhow. And so many sons of fathers reached out and said it was the most beautiful story they ever heard. And it was truly amazing. It really was. It was enlightening and truly humbling for me. It really was.
Yeah, again, especially if you're an American Gladiators fan, it's something you just have to watch. Where did they get, I mean, all of the film? I mean, I'm sure they didn't get to show all of the film, but I guess that camera behind the scene was, whoever did that was way ahead of their time.
Hey, let me tell you something. So Lori Fedrick, Ice, her and I are still great friends today. She was the only one, and most of the backstage film came from Lori. Lori had, those big cameras back in the day.
Put them on your shoulder. Yeah.
on your shoulder. He had that, right? So Netflix producers and directors all call us, tell us, hey, we're going to do this documentary. Get prepared. Here's what you got to do. Hey, do you have any pictures and film? All of us had a bunch of pictures. I go, I don't have film. That was before cell phones. I mean,
Yeah.
Lori had all this footage. They ended up paying her quite handsomely for the footage, but there's some footage that, backstage footage there on the documentary. I think it's documentary 4, maybe something like that, where they had me dancing in my underwear on the tour bus. And it
Yeah.
was the first time I ever saw that. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I'm naked.
Yeah. You'll appreciate it.
Yeah, pretty crazy that she had that footage from all those years. It was pretty cool. Because without that, I don't think it would have been as popular and as good a documentary as it turned out to be if it didn't have that backstage footage.
Yeah. I mean, for those of us that grew up with it, kind of like my wife said, I mean, you would wait until the weekend to be able to watch it, because you could stay up late and catch all the Gladiator episodes. But I think it really brought it together and kind of, like I said, opens that curtain into what life was really like
Yeah.
outside of just the competition, which was really cool. Do you think there will ever be a reboot? Do you know if there's ever been a talk of a reboot?
They're working on it right now. Amazon Prime Amazon, they were supposed to start filming over in the UK. UK has their own version. So the games are very expensive to set up and build. And so what they were going to do is go over to the UK, film it for the US version. They were supposed to do it this summer, and we were hoping to get some calls from MGM, who owns the rights to the Gladiators, and get a few of us originals back on the show, either as hosts or
This was
trainers or coaches, something
Yeah.
like that. But it got delayed for some reason. But they've already, and you can look it up on Google, that MGM is in the works of creating, the next new
Awesome.
series of American Gladiators.
Yeah, because I can see you guys actually hosting the show.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who knows if we'll introduce us or what, but
Man, well, that's cool. Hopefully, I think obviously, had a chance to get to know each other over the past year or so. So I've gotten to ask a lot of the questions. I'm just trying to think that
yeah.
some of our listeners would want to ask the same thing. But today, I mean, your career has totally transitioned. This is kind of
Right.
how our paths have crossed. And, you're now working with NSF Certified for Sport. We mention NSF in every single program that we do because it's super important. I don't believe the general public understands the lack of regulation
Yeah.
within the dietary supplement industry and the work that you and NSF Certified for Sport does to keep us as consumers safe, knowing what we're putting into our body through these
For sure.
supplements. So can you kind of talk about your role with NSF and how you got this role and kind of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, I got to tell you, I am thrilled to be working for such a great organization like NSF. It just what a ride I've had in the last year. I was hired a year ago as their director of client engagement. I work on a lot of our specifier programs, and what those are is professional sporting organizations like the Major League Baseball. We work very closely with Dave Ellis, Major League Baseball. They have so many categories of products that they have to fulfill within their clubhouses, either at the major league or minors, single, double, or triple. And so they have categories of products that they have to fill. And the only products that Major League Baseball and Players Association can even take or recommend are NSF Certified for Sport products. And what that means is we test for over 300 banned substances. What's on the label is going to be in the bottle and vice versa. We do aflatoxins, heavy metals, you name it, and label claim verification, things like that. And so when you see the NSF Certified for Sport mark on that label or on that product within the label, you know that it's been certified under the most stringent, strict criteria that we have. And what's going in your body, you're not going to have a banned substance. A pretty darn cool program. And I think what is so enlightening for me is to be able to work for an organization that I've also developed products. When I was the VP of Product Development for 24 Hour Fitness and Lifetime, I developed a lot of those Cert for Sport products since 2009. How I came about with this position that was offered to me is David Trozen, a very good friend of mine, and he is my direct report. He's been with NSF for many, many years. He's a legend in the industry. I've been working with David since 2009. He contacted me over a year ago and said, hey, we have this position. I can't guarantee you that you're going to get hired, but I'll at least get you an interview. And I went through 5 intense interviews and received the job last November. I've been with NSF for a year now, and I couldn't be happier. And the reason is I was one of those, and I have to say, victims of using a tainted supplement during the American Gladiators. We were getting drug tested for PEDs and things like that because the media came down and said, oh, these guys are massive. They must be doing drugs. So you guys need to test them. Well, we got tested. And I was using a product called Ultimate Orange back in the day, and people were making great strides off Ultimate Orange. We're like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Well, they were doing stuff, and I went and got tested, and I came up positive, and I know I wasn't taking anything illegal, and I came up positive, and they kicked me off the show. I hired an attorney, and it took round after round and test after test, and they finally came and found a false positive, tested the product, and found that metabolite that was spiking my T levels up. And so working with NSF in the sports certification realm is so dear to my heart because I was one of those players.
Yeah, it's a perfect fit for you because you understand. And I don't think, because you mentioned label verification, a lot of people in the general public have no idea that when you walk into a store and you buy a dietary supplement, just because you're buying it from the store doesn't necessarily mean that every ingredient on that label is actually in that product. So that's why, we always recommend people. NSF is the gold standard. You can download their app. You know what it is that you're putting in your body.
That's right.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you here is just with all of your life experiences, what's one key takeaway that has kept you on top of your game that's just added so much success in your life?
I love that question. What comes to mind is my granddad, when he lived in Escondido, California. We were living in Montana. My mom would always drive us to California every summer for many, many years. And this guy was a woodworker, and he had an orchard. And what he taught me as a young kid, I was 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, and I still remember him telling me today after I cleaned his shop, and I didn't do a very good job. And he says, Jim, guess what? Now you got to go back and redo all the work that you spent doing, the 2 hours of cleaning up. If you could just take your time and do the best job you can do when no one is watching. And I've lived with that. And the moral of the story is do the very best job that you can do with nobody else in the room watching. Wow. If you do that, you're going to be successful. There's a motto that I started to live by and to write on all autographs for the Gladiators called Never Surrender. And I've lived by that motto. My family lives by it. And it's a never surrender attitude is, I'm just like everybody else. I'm like you. We're all the same at the end of the day. We all have struggles. We all have ups and downs. Life's tough, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you can just do your best job, like I always tell my son, do the best job you can do. Be proud of what you do. It could be sweeping the floor, vacuuming the rug. It doesn't matter what you do in life. Do the best job you can do. You'll be proud of yourself. And from that, it filters into everything else, into your personal life, your corporate life. And I've lived my life like that all the time.
It's a great advice. And from somebody that's been successful throughout their career, you just hope somebody takes that mentality and it sticks with them, especially, your son's hearing it from you all the time. But for those of you that are listening, they're always asking, well, how are people so successful? What do they do? But, that's great advice. Well, Jim, this has been such a thrill to interview. Again, one of my childhood heroes growing up. But before I let you go, anybody that is familiar with the All Me podcast, we always end our interviews with what we call our curveball round. Now, this is going to have nothing to do with NSF or the American Gladiators, anything like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you 3 questions. The first question I'll read you, just first thing that pops to mind. You answer it. You tell me when you're ready, and we'll get started with question number 1.
Ready.
All right. What is your favorite way to unwind after a long weekday?
Go to the gym.
Okay. I was going to say the same thing. Go to the gym, or maybe, play with the kids. Now, question. What has been the best day of your life so far?
Best day of my life so far. I would have to say each of my each of my kids being born. I mean, that's a highlight. I mean, that's the best thing ever. It's
Yeah,
just,
man.
that's life.
Yeah, it's hard to have that perspective until you have kids. Last question: if you won $1 million, what would be the first thing you'd do? That's tax-free
I'll take
money.
you out to dinner.
I got to write a check to the IRS. That's tax-free money. $1 million cash.
$1 million cash. I would probably, boy, oh boy, oh boy. To be honest, man, I feel pretty fortunate with everything I have. So probably would take all my entire family and best friends and go on a trip of a lifetime so we can have that as a memory for the rest of our
Yeah,
lives.
that would be awesome. Then
Yeah.
sets them back for retirement. Well, Jim, man, again, thank you
Hey,
so
thank you.
much for joining
You
us
too.
on the All Me podcast. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day
Me
and
too.
sharing the story of your journey through life.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Don. And we will conquer the world together with NSF and the Taylor Hooton Foundation. Let's do it.
I agree. Working together to save lives.
That's right.